Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video talking about Star Trek Online. Because of some of the things that I'm working on both today and the next couple of weeks, today I'm just going to briefly go over my favorite specialization bridge officer abilities in space combat. This is because it's going to be a long time before I cover each of the specializations for their bridge officer abilities in space in greater depth, so I'm kind of doing a TLDR video today just to quickly go over all those different things. This is going to be just for tanking inside the game, so some of these abilities are going to be much better than others for all the other types of playstyles inside of the game. I'll be venturing through these from my least favorite to my most favorite specializations with the particular abilities that I feel are particularly strong for tanking. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I'm going to start with how the special abilities work inside Star Trek Online, and then I'll get into the 5 specializations. So first off, for every specialist bridge officer seat, there's already a set of abilities there depending upon the profession for the seat, either tactical, engineering, or science. Each one of those has your particular abilities depending upon that profession. So that should already be pretty straightforward already if you're watching this video. However, specialization seats adds an additional set of abilities on top of those available to those bridge officers in that seat. However, those abilities are only available if that bridge officer is trained and is currently using that specialization in that seat. As of making this video, there are only 5 full specializations in the game. There are 3 secondary specializations, but secondary specializations don't have bridge officer abilities that accompany them. To get a bridge officer in a specialization, you first need to train them up to max rank, either commander for Federation and Klingon captains, or sub-commander for Around the Republic captains. From there, you use a specialization qualification manual of the appropriate type that you want for that officer, and then train the abilities that you want on them like any other profession. As is listed on this screen, there are a few places to get qualifications. There's the qualification manual that you can get at level 62, and then there's 2 other ones available from particular missions inside the game. There probably are other sources out there. As many of you have noted in past videos, I don't do enough research to cover everything in my videos, so feel free to leave in the comments any other sources of free specialization manuals that you can get inside the game, outside of crafting. There's also 2 bridge officers, and probably more as well from missions that already have a specialist training already on them. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into our next types of things on this. Before I say that though, just keep in mind, specialization bridge officer abilities are only available from on Tier 6 starships. Everything below that, Tier 1 through Tier 5, including Tier 5 upgraded ships, do not have any specialization powers in any of their bridge officer seats. Even though Tier 5 you technically have the battle capability of Tier 6 starships besides one bridge officer ability less, they also don't have the specialist abilities either, so there is that downside to them as well. So to start off with the bottom part of this, we're going to start with intelligence. Now, I'm not saying that this specialization is bad per se, just that it's not the most optimal for tanking inside the game. Nevertheless, there are 2 abilities that are decent that I like. The first one is the most known one, which is called Override Subsystem Safeties, or OSS for short. This ability gives 30 to 50 power to every subsystem if you activate this, which is pretty strong, as it is basically the engineering captain's special trait EPS manifold efficiency. But it's available to any captain in the game now that has an intel seat on their ship. As thus, if you're an engineering captain, this isn't necessarily as useful for you as much as it would be useful for science and tactical captains in the game, which those 2 professions combined are about 75% of the player base, so it's overall going to be useful to most captains. The one downside is that after you use this, after a few seconds, a random subsystem will go offline, but that can be easily countered through either bridge officer abilities or special passes on a couple of reputation items that will automatically remove debuffs off of your ship. The other ability is called Ionic Turbulence. This is one of the many bridge officer abilities that is an AoE control and pull ability, which is really nice for threat inside the game for tanking. The difference is that this is the only specialization ability that does its job at the lieutenant rank. Most of the other abilities in the game, Gravity Well, Timeline Stabilizer, Deploy Gravitic Platform, all are at the Lieutenant Commander rank. There also is the ability to track between repulsors, which is also viable at the Lieutenant rank if you have a very expensive duty officer, but that's if you're only paying that much money for it. Anyway, so our next specialization is Temporal Operative. I'm using this as in terms of this ranking, I'm using the basis that we're assuming that we're using energy tanks inside the game, either you using beams or you using cannons and turrets, just because that's the most common and easiest way to do tanking inside the game when it comes to the rankings for these specializations. As thus, this one comes in 4th. However, if you're doing a science tank, Temporal Operative is extremely high up as well. Just going to throw that out there. Also, the one real quirk with Temporal Operative is that it relies heavily upon the entropy mechanic, which typically needs 3 general things to be effective. It needs an entropy maker, an entropy spreader, and an entropy user, so that it uses the tons of entropy that you created with your other abilities. As thus, this can be really hard to fully utilize and judge accurately in terms of the offensive capabilities if you don't fully understand how to properly chain and work together the entropy abilities inside the game. There's a lot of great links on the STO Reddit for STO Builds for various science builds with Temporal Operative abilities heavily on them. For me, the abilities in this list don't really need entropy to be good, but it can also be amplified by entropy if you so choose to also have them on your ship. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first ability is Causal Reversion. It's a really good hull heal for tanking, as its healing can be amplified by you recently took damage. It also can be amplified with entropy mechanics, but it's still good even if you don't have any entropy built on your ship or on enemies that's going to be used for this. It also happens to be, because of all this, if it's all stacked up properly, it can potentially be the strongest ensign level heal inside the game for your hull. Really, the big place where I use this in builds is on ships where I need a certain seat to have a tactical ability in it, but I also need an additional heal. And so for a lot of the tendencies that are Lieutenant Temporal Operative, I will have like a tactical team and Causal Reversion in there in that seat. That's just for the FYI for you all. Our next ability here is Chronometric Inversion Field. This ability is basically a physical damage version of Aceton Beam, which is an engineering ability. And also, for those of you that looked at my old builds when I didn't use specialist abilities, I like to use Aceton Beam a lot. Both these abilities are a single target damage debuff of 50% at rank 1, and goes up to 75% damage debuff at rank 3. The biggest problem between the two and why Chronometric Inversion Field is so good is that Aceton Beam doesn't start until Lieutenant Commander, while Chronometric Inversion Field can be used at the Lieutenant rank. As thus, if you want a single target damage debuff at a really low rank, Chronometric Inversion Field is going to be pretty optimal for you. Just going to throw that out there for you. And for our third and last ability here, it's going to be Timeline Collapse. It's another alternate version for Gravity Well and Energy Tank builds. And if you're going to be in a science build, you could use this in conjunction with Gravity Well for even more AoE pull damage inside your build. That's really up to you. So our third specialization here is going to be Miracle Worker. If you are a tank captain in the game, this specialization should be, in just about all cases, be your primary specialization. If you only play space, strategist should be your secondary specialization, while if you only play ground combat, then commando should be your secondary specialization. Those two specific secondary specializations are extremely good in their respective areas, but are pretty worthless in the other. For well-rounded builds in space ground combat, I would recommend Miracle Worker primary with command as your secondary if you're a tactical or engineering captain, while if you're a science captain, you should be using Miracle Worker as your primary and Temporal Operative as your secondary. I've talked about that a few times in my science tank builds as well, so you can watch those if you want more details as to why. When I cover the Miracle Worker specialization in a few months, I will talk about how awesome most of the abilities are inside of it, either as improvements or equivalents to other regular abilities inside the game. or it's just alternates to tactical and science abilities. But for this video, I'll go over just my 4 favorite abilities that you should consider specifically for tanking. The very top of this list is the one that has made the Barbed Juggernaut really strong, which is Narrow Sensor Bands. When you're at rank 3, it goes from a 20% bonus damage to up to 50% if you're really close to your enemy. And because, I mean, for tanking, ideally you should be hugging the enemies a whole ton. It should be pretty obvious that this is really strong. The others here in this list are pretty useful, but are more situational or have specific caveats around them for their effectiveness. The first one of those is Mixed Armament Synergy, which is really good for beam builds that have something other than a beam in them, like maybe a torpedo, a mine, or if you're doing Polaron and have the Morphogenic Energy weapon from the home mission, that also is not technically a beam, so it's also a different weapon. After using this ability, the way that it works is that whatever first weapon that you fire, the other 3 general types of weapons get a significant bonus damage boost to them. The 4 different types of weapons are beams, cannons, torpedoes, and mines. So if you use your weapons optimally and really well, you could have a great damage output. However, because of how situational and hard this can be to use very well, I don't veer towards here honestly, but it can be really good. Also, as a side note to you all, turrets count for the cannon category for those 4 general types of weapons. Another ability here is Exceeded Rated Limits. Of the 4 abilities here, I feel this is the ability that most people completely overlook in Star Trek Online, but it's actually really strong if you have really high power levels, which, by the way, if you have a Miracle Worker Starship, they're already going to have a little bit of a power boost over other ships, and especially if you're an engineering captain, you're going to have even higher power levels than other captains in the game. In my opinion, this ability could have been called Beam Rapid Fire, but isn't called that because it will also enhance cannons as well as beams. It does put your regular beam and cannon abilities on cooldown, like Beam Fire Will, Beam Overload, Cannon Rapid Fire, Cannon Scatter Volley, but it is a really nice consistent damage alternative to Beam Overload inside the game, and also you don't need to have that in the tactical seat. Most of these Miracle Worker abilities are going to be in engineering. The Barbed Juggernaut isn't going to use this. The Barbed Juggernaut will just use Cannon Rapid Fire 3 as that's stronger. But this ability is also great to enhance single target damage, especially if you're using beams. The last here in this list is Gravitic Induction Platform. It's actually called Deploy Gravitic Induction Platform. In fact, you look through it in the names of the bridge officer abilities, but anyway, it starts at Lieutenant Commander, and it is another alternative to Gravity Well. And we've gotten several other alternatives to that, and so just feel free to see the description of the ability and how it works, as to the nuances of the ability itself. Now, to preface this, Cryptic, if any of you are watching this, you would probably be surprised to see that I rank Pilot as the second best specialization for tanking. This is mainly due to one really strong ability that's really good, but it is also because there are insanely few ships in the game with both command attract fire and any version of a pilot ability available to use. Cryptic, I know you've broken your rules in the past, like you had a really fast command science vessel called the Sonar Command Science Vessel that had a Commander Science Command seat in it. I really encourage you to add more pilot ships that have a command attract fire feature to them. Just because a specialization isn't typically meant for a role doesn't mean you can't release more ships in the future that veer away from that initial intention of that specialization. Pilot has its own weird nuances, so I understand why you haven't had very many tanks that have a pilot seat in them, but please consider that for the future. Right now, to my limited knowledge inside the game, there are only 2 tank ships with command attract fire and the ability to use pilot abilities, which is the Tier 6 Walker class from the Low Buy store and the Federation Tier 6 Advanced Light Cruiser, either the C-Store version or the Fleet version. As a side note here, I would imagine that the Tier 6 Rising Corvette that will be coming out this summer, that you can earn through doing the summer event, will probably be a pilot escort, as its Tier 5 version does have the fastest base impulse speed inside the game. So having pie abilities on top of that to let it go even faster would probably synergize really well with that ship. For the two abilities in this list, the super insanely strong one is called Attack Pattern Lambda. It was clear that this was meant for PvP, but it's also really good for tank players as well inside the game. It happens to be the only attack pattern in the game that is available at the Ensign rank. Attack Pattern Beta and Attack Pattern Delta are at the Lieutenant rank, and Attack Pattern Omega is at the Lieutenant Commander. This is really strong because of the Confuse proc on weapons. The 20 to 30% chance to confuse is really nice, because if enemies are confused, it makes them harder for them to attack you and your allies, and likely that they will attack their own allies. Many DPS captains have noted in the past that this ability should be really strong for tanks that don't have the bridge officer seats available to afford using one of their tactical seats for a attack pattern ability. And I completely agree on that, except both ships that have pilot abilities with command track fire have enough tactical seats to be able to afford putting an attack pattern in their tactical abilities. Perhaps if for a future tank version that's more tank focused, that doesn't have very many tactical abilities, might be able to have much more value from Attack Pattern Lambda with that specific aspect to them. The other ability here is Hold Together. It is basically a shorter version of Hazard Emitters that doesn't rely on auxiliary power for its effectiveness. Most science abilities do. Hold Together does not. Instead, its effectiveness is solely based upon your whole heal ability, as well as how high your throttle is, which is important as throttle is different than your impulse speed. For instance, if you have a slow ship at full throttle and a fast ship at low throttle going at the exact same speed, and they both used Hold Together, your slower ship would get more healing than your faster ship, assuming that everything else for those ships would have been equal. So when it comes down to hold together, I mean, you can even just completely ignore this ability altogether and just use Attack Pattern Lambda, and you would get the insane amount of utility and bonus from the specialization with even just an ensign pilot seat in your starship. So that's just my little TLDR for that. Now, if you have watched my channel for a while, you should all know how much I love the command specialization. It has a lot in common nowadays with Miracle Worker, but command happens to have debilitation of enemies alongside the strengthening of yourself and your allies. Something that Miracle Worker doesn't really have that much, and Temporal Operative only has to a limited extent, unless you really have Temporal Operative's entry mechanic really mastered, which is definitely not me, as I have only been playing Science closer to properly for about a year now, basically when Victory's Life came out, which, considering I've been playing this game for about 5 years now, might be saying something about the game. Now, most command abilities are pretty hard to use, but the following 3 aren't that hard to use at all, and are very easily to use and execute inside the game, especially in the realm of tanking. Now, the most commonly used ability inside the game for tanking is called Rally Point Marker. At the Lieutenant slot, it is objectively the strongest instant hold heal available inside the game right now. Causal Reversion and Temporal Specialization has the strongest instant heal if you tank and time everything properly with Entropy. Rally Point Marker, however, is still a really nice instant heal at the Lieutenant seat, and it has an area of effect heal over time that also removes debuffs just like Hazard Emitters and Hold Together. It's an extremely straightforward and good ability, and even if you don't stay in the AoE healing area, and your allies don't, it's still a good and strong heal overall. What I will say though, the really key to the specialization of why it's really strong is the Suppression Barrage ability. It's like Aceton Beam and Chronometric Inversion Field in that it does do a significant damage debuff to enemies, except this one is slightly weaker, but it does its debuff through your weapons instead of a once application to one specific enemy. The debuff only lasts 3 seconds, but with Beam Fire at Will, you can keep this debuff on enemies with reapplication if they clear it quite easily with one of their own Bridge Officer or console abilities. This is also probably the only commander ability that I would say is stronger for tanking with energy builds than the commander engineering alternatives of Reverse Shield Polarity 3 and Aux Structural Integrity Field 3 on ships with a Commander Engineering/Command seat. If the enemies are only damaging you with half their firepower, you won't need to use a lot of your defensive abilities like Vertical Polarity as soon, and thus won't need those abilities to have to last as long against those enemies either, really. Or you might even need to use as many of your defensive abilities if the enemies aren't hitting you enough to need to use those defensive abilities. But that's just me personally. I also have put overall emitters on this list, not because I particularly like this ability, but it's just because I'm aware that a lot of these stronger command cruisers inside the game end up having you needing to use an ensign command ability in the build. And of the 3 ensign command abilities inside the game, overall emitters is just the best one of those 2, of the 3 in there. Reroute Power to Life Support is a garbage ability in the current meta of Star Trek Online, and Concentrate Firepower, which is the other ability available at ensign rank for command, is meant for torpedo-specific and heavy DPS builds, which tanks are only going to veer towards a little bit if they're an exotic/torpedo build, and even then, the exotic is carrying those builds much more than the torpedoes will, so Concentrate Firepower isn't necessarily as valuable there either. But anyway, this is a really long video, so I'm not actually going to go too much in depth on the choices here. The choices are listed from number 5 to number 1 in terms of the specializations and the particular powers in them. In yellow are the best one, in my opinion, of each one of the specializations. Feel free to pause the video and take a screenshot, or pause the video so you can write down these options if you want to look for different tanks in the game that have some of these things available to them. And this slide right here is for if Cryptic happens to be watching this video. Here are 3 tanks in the game with 3 theoretical builds that currently don't exist inside the game, but that I really wish were. The first build here is based upon everything in this video and my personal preferences to side of tanking, and the second and third options here are based upon my previous video called My Dream Starship Pack, with the second tank build being the Enterprise from that video, with the third option here being the Klingon D7 from that video, and how it would work for tanking in Star Trek Online. But anyways, hopefully this video was fun and enjoyable for you all. This video did take a little bit longer to release due to a certain critique. Feel free to let me know if this is better as a result of it, as it did roughly double the time to make this video by doing so. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Feel free to talk and discuss in the comments. Stay positive and enjoy the rest of your day.